Alright, welcome everyone to another very memorable game of Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. So I am quite excited to bring you guys this game. I have not had a game like this in quite some time, so let's get right into it. Just a quick disclaimer first though, this is not a professional level game. The ELO level in this game is probably around 1100 to 1000. So this game was memorable for a couple reasons. First and foremost, it was just a very long game. It was about 3 hours long. It was a very evenly matched game. Both players were quite resilient, and I also thought that my opponent was just a really great sport, which also made it quite memorable. So just to go over a couple of basics, I'm playing blue here as Slavs. My opponent is red, playing Mayans. This is being played on the arena map, so both players start with a stone wall around their main base. What this means is usually on this map, their rushes do not typically happen just because both bases are protected, although it does happen. I have had a game recently where the opponent used towers to rush the feudal, but this is pretty uncommon. Alright, so let's speed it up here and get into the action. Just a couple things to mention as well. There were probably 5 stages in this game. On this map, because of the way it's set up, it really is a rush to the Imperial Age at the beginning. So this is something that I think both players had in mind. It is also a little bit of a rush to the relics, because those can be quite useful in the late game, given that they are a great source of gold, of course. I will also mention now that both players did at least one thing really well, and I think Red did a really good job just having a really strong early build and just dominating the map early on, and putting me in siege pretty early on in the game and taking the lion's share of the gold on the map, which is always important. So that's something that he did quite efficiently. On my end, I would say that one of the things I did well in this game is, and that's maybe one of the takeaways I think from the game, is just making good use of buildings as a defensive strategy. It's not your first choice, but if you are on the defensive, buildings can really be an advantage. It really is the opposite from real life, where buildings take a long time to build and can be burned down really quickly. In Age of Empires, it is the completely other way around. Buildings can be built really easily, but take a very long time to destroy. And so using that feature of the game, it almost seems a little bit overpowered sometimes, but I actually think it's a great feature in the game. But using that feature can really be an advantage, even when you're on the offense, but especially when you're on the defense, to distract the enemy fire, absorb enemy hits. Alright, so let's see the opening phases here. So again, it's a rush to the Imperial. That would be the first phase. Second phase of the game would definitely be the initial battles. A third phase was my first attempt to break out. Fourth phase, and definitely the longest part of the game, was a war of attrition that was a stalemate and lasted for over an hour, I'm sure. And then lastly, there was a kind of a final showdown to the game. I won't give away how the game ends, but it definitely was tight, or close to the very end. Oh, my first unit lost in the game to a lizard. That's always not a good sign, I guess, for this endeavor here to protect this relic. So what I'm doing here is sending in a couple of units to the opponent's relics, the ones that are close to the opponent's base. And the reasoning here is that I might be able to snipe off a couple of monks, because usually opponents go for the first relic that's outside their base. However, unfortunately, this does not pan out for me here, and I am driven back. Meanwhile, I'm trying the same strategy over here. So again, the idea is to go for the relics that are closest to the opponent base, and see if you can snipe off the opponent's monks. Red made it to castle first before me. So at this stage we're pretty similar, both dropping about 3 or 4 town centers. This is what Red has as well, I believe. So ironically, I'm the one who loses monks. 100 gold, not ideal. still hoping to catch some of his monks, but it's not really working at this point. So I do manage to get this monk here, and I didn't see this during the game, but my monk walks right past his opponent, his army. These are the types of things that you never really see in a game. Only when the replay do you see it. Which is always the great thing about watching the replays, you notice all kinds of details in the game. Alright, so I really do focus here on trying to take down this castle. Managed to convert one of the villagers that was going to build it, but he manages to drop a castle close to my base. However, I don't let that discourage me. I know what my strategy is. I'm going skirmishers and onagers to get the counter against this. So at this point we're both rushing to imperial, both hoping to get there first. Now this villager here is going to have quite the adventure. She escapes and manages to nab this relic from the back. So the idea here is to get some good vision. Vision is always important in these games. Vision, you can see your opponent's army movements, which is really important for in the game to catch your opponent in a bad moment, so to speak. So here he's dropping a second castle. Some of the earliest engagements, he backs off. Grab that relic. So I do drop a counter castle. Always important to get that up right away, and I'm on my way to the imperial. So he's building up his first force, and I'm not sure if he has obsidian upgrade here, but he takes down that wall. So I'm not sure, it's not really the best way to lose your onagers, but that's how it happened. So I don't take any chances. I send many villagers in to get that wall up right ASAP. I have now made it to the Imperial Age. I didn't mention this earlier, but I built a side gate here to escape with some villagers. It's always good when you're pinned in like this, as I am right now. I was able to plug off this first breakthrough that he made. But when you're pinned into the back of your base like this, you have just enough space to really get your economy to full bloom, full capacity, but there isn't much room, and sometimes you can get away with building some economy in the corners of the map. So if we just look at Fog of War, we can see that he does not have vision yet of the sides of the map. And the idea here is to really just make sure you can get to full capacity, as it's easy to if you're blocked in and you have no villages outside your base, it's easy to get to not be able to get to full capacity. Alright, so I immediately drop a trebuchet and I go for his castle. Unfortunately though, I did not protect it, and takes it down pretty easily. Oh, good shot. So I'm now maxed out. However, I do have 40 idle villagers. Something I didn't mention is this game was also memorable because it had a large number of misclicks on my end. I'll just point them out as they come along. So as Slavs are strong at infantry if they get the Druzina upgrade. The key, of course, is to get that Druzina upgrade. Meanwhile, I'm going heavy onagers against his archers, and a decent amount of skirmishers as well. So he is now mining my gold here, and I decide that it's time to make a move out of my base and see if I can push him off with this gold. I'm actually running out of gold here. I don't have that much left in my base. You don't start off with that much in your base, so you really do have to claim your end, and it only gets worse. The disadvantage only gets worse later on if you don't get the gold. So I guess I got a few good shots out there. However, always remember to upgrade your update your target, otherwise you might end up shooting your own troops. So he actually drops a third castle here. Is that a third? Pause it briefly to mention that we both sent off trebuchets to hit each other's castles. Sometimes when you're attacking, you can get away with just sending one trebuchet to attack an opponent castle, and your opponent might not notice it. That's exactly what I tried here. Going for another castle here. So I'm going heavy into trying to repair this castle. Not completely sure why I did that, but I'm guessing it's because I was hoping to get as many trebuchets out as possible. I do not have enough resources to get Druzina. Maybe I'll just pause it quickly to show what that is. Druzina is the Slav upgrade, which allows for splash damage. Here it is. However, note it is quite expensive, 1200 food, 500 gold. So you do need to have enough resources accumulated to get that. Another resource, I did get conscription, but Druzina is an expensive upgrade. Another very expensive one, of course, is the upgrade to Siege Onager, which is 1450 food, 1000 gold. I do get the upgrade out to Onager, but to Siege Onager, that is one step that is expensive, and when you're in a close match, it can be tricky to accumulate enough resources to get that out. So he does a really great job with these Eagle Warriors, and they slip past there. Another misclick. I allow his Eagle Warriors to get past just in time, and they take down my last remaining trebuchet. I have lost my castle here. I now have no castles left, no trebuchets, and he has besieged me with 5 castles, or I guess 4 castles outside my base. Not a great position to be in, and I decide that it's better to retreat strategically here. So it can be really important when you're playing defensively like this to not lose your entire army. It's important to. It's very tempting to just throw in your troops and to try to just overwhelm your opponent by sending in your every single additional soldier that comes out. But you need to definitely stop that impulse and stop that temptation, and instead rally your troops. Make sure you get that critical mass. So if you can get that critical mass, get to 200 supply, then you'll actually be in a position to defeat your opponent's army. Meanwhile, and this is what I was mentioning at the beginning of the game, buildings kind of are OP, and I am just dropping buildings all over the place so that his trebuchets have target practice, and this is the idea here, is to delay him as much as possible. So I'll just mention quickly here that, you know, from my point of view, I am pinned into my base, and the idea is to push him out, and once you have the momentum, you can then build on that momentum, take the stone and gold over here. My idea here is that his units will absorb his shots on my buildings, meanwhile my units focus fire on his units. So that's the idea. When you're fighting inside your base, the opponent's army is often distracted shooting your buildings if your opponent isn't careful. Meanwhile, you can then focus fire on your opponent's army. That is one way to reverse the tide. But reversing the tide, it's always the most difficult at the very beginning stage of it, because your opponent does have the advantage if he or she's on the offense. So I'm trying to reverse the tide here just in time. I got the Halberger upgrade out. It seems to work, and I am not pushing out. However, misclick of misclicks, somehow I managed to lock this gate, and all my villagers are running right past his archers, and I lose a huge number of them on the way. And of course I have one villager doing all the work, the others are just sitting around. So in my mind, we're now entering the third phase of the game here, which is my first push out of my base. My idea here actually was to win the game from here, you know. I'm thinking I've got siege rams. With this combination of siege rams, which are the cheapest gold unit, along with just maxed trash units, I can then, with having the counter, I can then beat him. My economy is at full capacity nearly, and from here my idea is just to keep pushing out. I'm not completely sure why I went for this siege workshop here, but this next batch is going for the castle, and that is my plan. Notice I have 163 supply, my opponent has 136, around 20 or 30 less villagers, and yet has much more supplies than me, resources I mean. It definitely looks like my opponent has a better resource exchange right now, and definitely seems to have a stronger economy. With fewer villagers, he has more resources and is holding me out. However, he does have less, his supply is consistently below mine at this stage in the game, and I do think that plays against him. Alright, so let's see how close I come here to destroying this. Below 200, oh my goodness. Alright, but the last battering ram is destroyed and he manages to hold on to it. And that is where my first advance out is more or less stopped. But I haven't quite accepted that. I'm mining the heck out of this stone over here. And my idea is I'm just going to keep pushing. To give a quick highlight of what's happening across the map, his castles here did destroy my expansion. I had a town center here, my additional food income that I was hoping to get. I decided to drop a castle here. So all of this is just absolutely frantic. It's extremely close here. I am completely out of resources. I am desperately trying to reverse the tide here, hoping really to just keep the momentum going, but it is not easy. It turns into a game of whack-a-mole here. Every time he drops a trebuchet, I need to take it out. In the process, I lose many of my units. Down here, he destroyed my expansion. I had some villagers going for this gold. However, I do have a monk who survives. I also have a villager that survives down here. So just a couple units out there, but on the whole, I am pinned in. I'll just mention again that the trick with these buildings is you have to replace them as soon as they're destroyed, so that it's very, it's often the case that we forget to replace buildings that are destroyed when you're on the defensive, but it's absolutely important that once the front moves on that you immediately replace the buildings that have been destroyed, and that way if it happens that the opponent is back in your base, he once again needs to distract his shots and destroy them. Meanwhile, you absolutely cover the map with buildings. And every time a building is destroyed, you can build other buildings. This is something I do later on, and this way you can keep your output during the game. I'm not saying that I did this necessarily well here, but that's the idea anyway. Alright, so my idea here again is to push out from here. I'm still aiming to get this gold, but as you can see, the gold is actually nearly gone. He is also mining my gold over here. He's got another gold supply down there, gold patch down there. So he definitely is doing a better job at capturing the resources on the map. Alright, so as I mentioned, getting enough resources in order to do the upgrade is a real skill. It's not easy. I'm now maxed out. I'm really trying to get the Drazina upgrade. Again, that upgrade that gives infantry splash damage. Given that I can only build, trash units, it's really important I get that upgrade out. However, I am consistently being, just constantly fighting here. It's a constant battle to keep them at bay. And so getting that upgrade is very much a challenge. Couple other things I'll mention. So if you have the chance, it's always great to build buildings as close to the front as possible. Just pause it briefly to show that Red's units are actually running all the way from inside his base across the entire map. He does have a lot of production here, which is obviously really great, but I think it would have been helpful for him in this point in the game to have had production right here to get units as soon as possible to the front line. That's one advantage I have actually, which is that my production is so close to the front that it is arriving to the front much faster than him. So even though he has the gold advantage, he has all the gold on the map, his units have to run so far. Another thing, and I'll mention this just quickly now, that he, at this point in the game, despite having so many resources, is not maxed out. It's always important to be maxed out. And he has the gold now to do it. He could easily have, along with his gold units, 40 or 80 trash units, but he doesn't do that at this stage in the game. Another thing that he doesn't do, which I'll point out later, is his rally point isn't always at the front. Now it's kind of rich for me to criticize his gameplay because I'm actually making so many mistakes here. One thing that is interesting is that so he has 100 villagers, I have 115, as I mentioned earlier, so I consistently have more villagers than him, and despite that, I have fewer resources. It just shows that my farm placement is absolutely terrible, and it only gets worse as the game goes on. And I'm absolutely desperate for space, so I am hacking wood anywhere I can, and so Red did a really great job of just blocking off the space for me, which made me consistently have few resources, I think. Alright, so let's see how this pans out here. I'm still aiming to push out, and again, take these resources, build on this momentum, take down his castles, and see if I can win the game from here. In my mind, I'm actually thinking that I'm gonna win the game here, and then that was the game. But let's see what my opponent has in store for me. Alright, so I eventually decide I'm gonna go for trebuchets. That's the only way I can actually take down this castle. All those siege rams, they're not gonna cut it. But, so much for that, my trebuchet is destroyed, and things are only looking worse from here. I'm actually out of resources, my supply is down to 136, and my breakout attempt here looks like it's not really working. Meanwhile, I'm chasing units in my base. I do have this one monk here though who heals my units, which I did not see, but that was helpful. Really great job of him to use evil warriors against my skirmishers. Perfect counter. So this is about the moment in the game where I realize, you know what, this push out here is not working. Instead of throwing in my units uselessly and having them all die here, I retreat and I hunker down. So things are really not looking that bright for me right now. My push out failed. And it's very tempting at this point in the game to think, wait a minute, if that didn't work, my strategy there, siege rams, trash units, what's to say anything else in the future could work? Because I'm not gaining any new resources here. I'm stuck with the relics I have. I have 2 relics. I'm stuck with just the basic income units. If that breakout didn't work, why would a future breakout work? And so at this point in the game, it is not looking that great for me. However, my strategy remains, and of course you always have to think, if you're, if you can keep playing, why leave? But it's tempting here to think, what can I do from here? And my strategy from this point in the game, and this is really, we're entering the 4th phase here, which is the war of attrition, or just the stalemate. My goal here is just to buy time, try to build a castle, get the Juzina upgrade, and then I can maybe think about winning the game, where I'm not even at the point of even thinking of winning the game. I'm just in pure survival mode here. But if I can accumulate enough resources, buy stone, build a castle, get the Juzina upgrade, then I will have a chance to beat his army, because then my Helvegers will have the splash damage. At this point, I don't have that. So that is my gameplay, or my strategy here. A very desperate position to be in, not ideal at all. However, I do get that relic back, so that's one piece of silver lining. Red, on the other hand, his strategy now is to just defeat me. And I think he's in a pretty solid position. However, as I mentioned before, so many resources and is not maxed out. So that's a bit interesting. But we'll see how he does that. I think it's very common for players to, they have their gold army, and it's tempting to just try to win with that gold army, but it is important to max out with trash units. So these buildings were replaced. I don't really mind losing them because I have buildings all over the place. Buildings are so cheap, you can replace them so easily. I build production at the back of my base all over the place. Alright, so this is pretty good of him. He uses Eagle Warriors to take out my skirmishers. And the war of attrition begins. Alright, so these units do exactly what they're intended to do. Drive away his troops by distracting him. Which is what siege rams are really good at doing. Absorbing hits and distracting enemy troops. Base becomes increasingly packed. I begin plugging holes here. I do this because I am fully aware that just a couple of Eagle Warriors, if they can slip through here, even 5 Eagle Warriors can just wreak havoc to a wood line like this. So I do plug up these holes every single time, as often as I can, knowing from bitter experience from past games what a couple of Eagle Warriors can do in the corner of your base. So I do have the counter here to him, which is pretty good. But these Eagle Warriors are really the bane. This is why I send as many halberds as I can. So this is really, this whole part of the game was, and it stays like this until the very end. Absolutely desperate. Quick overview though, he is now officially out of gold. So as I have been for until now, my opponent is now also out of gold. He still has gold units, but he no longer has huge gold reserves. However, he's in the middle of my base and things are looking pretty grim. So this is the moment here. Many of his units are shooting at, or were shooting at buildings. My buildings have a very short, they don't need to run very far to get to the front. Meanwhile, his units are running across the map. So my units are being replaced at the front line almost immediately. And I can just barely turn the tide here. And he sees this and starts retreating. So he actually wasn't looking at this battle during the game. He was looking at something else. So it's always important to look at what's happening there. But it's always important to be maxed out, because if he had had about 70 trash units, he probably could have pushed this back. And I think he might have had me. He was right in my base here at this point in the game. But this is not the last time that he will have me pinned down in my base, and the desperate fighting continues. He is now going for my economy, and he's got eagles all over my skirmishers. But again, because my troops do not need to run very far to get to the front, I have just enough halberds getting to the front to hold his eagles at bay, but it is a desperate fight. Meanwhile, he dropped markets all over my gates, which is a very interesting strategy. I've never seen that before. But I found a pretty easy workaround. I just make small holes in my wall, so that's why I get my troops out. And what happens when you just barely push back your opponent? You just cover the entire landscape with new real estate, you know? I guess, you know, middle of a battle, I guess it's a time for a real estate boom, apparently. Why not? But we just have one villager doing that, but these buildings are slowly going up, and so if he comes back with more trebuchets, he will once again have to take them all out again. So that's the idea. The next time he comes, he'll have to do it all over again. And which again buys me time. I'm slowly buying stone, but it is taking ages to try to get that castle out to get the Druzina upgrade. So we kind of hit a pause here. And myself trying to desperately rebuild here, get back to maximum population. I'll just mention quickly that the longer there's a pause in the fighting, the better for me, because that means that all the resources that would have gone to replacing troops now, I can instead save and then sell to get stone. And that gets me closer to getting Druzina, where I can then think about maybe winning the game somehow. Again, that I'm still just in pure survival mode here. But there's no fighting happening right now, and so I can accumulate resources and buy stone. Red, though, is not idle at all. But, again, as mentioned, for the first time in the game, he is out of gold, and he only has 81 villagers. But somehow, with his Mayan farms and efficient economy, he is able also to accumulate resources and rebound quickly. And he learns now, he changes his strategy. As I mentioned at the beginning, both players were very versatile, very resilient, change strategies, and he now is moving to max out for the first time. However, in this space now that I have, in which I am not being attacked, this is the time that I'm using to get resources to drop a castle. So let's see if I'm able to get that castle down. And there it is. At long last, I managed to buy stone to build a new castle, and this time I'm not taking any chances. I have it way at the back of my base, completely useless, but I really need to get that Druzina upgrade out. And I know that if it's close to the front, it's at risk of being destroyed. Red, meanwhile, is now maxing out and getting ready for his next attack. This is what he can see. I've built outposts to kind of serve as a weather towers here to kind of get a weather forecast of the enemy armies. And he now starts shooting at them, which is the opening salvo of the next battle. This, again, is all part of the war of attrition. And it is just getting started, actually. However, I'm quite lucky here. And Druzina upgrade finally gets upgraded. And there it is, Druzina. And just in time for the battle. So, for the first time, I have Druzina. And I'm hoping that it's going to turn the tide. And I'm hoping, from here on, I could maybe just, once again, strike out and defeat him, now that I have this Druzina upgrade. Let's see, though, how that pans out for me. Quick giveaway, Red definitely has some more surprises in store for me. And if I thought that Druzina was going to win it by itself, I am in for a surprise, because it is not enough to turn the tide here. So I stay on the defensive. I try to push out, but Red maintains his siege, and I remain on the defensive. Red has 3 castles here, 1 in the middle, and 1 over here. But actually, only 1 here, which means that it is the only castle between my base and his. I'm not too concerned by this at this point, because I had moved my main wood economy over here, again building my great wall of palisade over here to try to block off any raiding. And the war of attrition continues. Every now and then I'm trying to take down his castle, but It is not enough by itself. For anyone who's ever had a game that was this close with an opponent, you'll know that there's so many things to do at the exact same time. Your economy, and suddenly you're in a situation where you realize, wait, I have no wood. Why do I not have any wood? Or suddenly your supply is down to 130, and you have no resources. Why do I not? Why do you have no? Why do I have no resources and 70 supply that's not being used? Many panicky moments here in fighting off red. And every time I think that I've destroyed his army, he shows up with a new army. And in fact, red has changed strategies, and he is now also consistently maxing out. But, as mentioned, you rebuild your buildings. Once again, he has to take them all out, and that buys me time. Time to rebuild them again, and rebuild my army. A very cyclical process. Both sides trying to gain the edge here. I'll mention again quickly here that red has 80 supply and 200 and he's maxed out, which means that he has 120 soldiers. Meanwhile, I have about 130 villagers, which means I only have 70 soldiers. So he actually consistently outnumbers me here. And that's actually, congrats and hats off to my opponent for that, because his economy is efficient enough that he can be maxed out and still have, his economy is efficient enough that he's maxed out and still has resources. So that really gives him an advantage here. It's only because his production buildings are so far away from the front and mine are so close to the front that I'm able to hold him off here. But it is a desperate fight, and in fact, it continues for quite some time. So right about now, both players, reacting to the other player, come to the same conclusion. We need onagers. And so here, red builds onagers. Meanwhile, I believe I have a couple that show up at any moment now. There it is. Onagers on their way. And again, I've lost buildings, so we are rebuilding them. And I've also built them at the back of my base, so that even if I lose the entire front end of my base, as happened during that initial phase, I will still have ample production buildings to keep the units coming out. So both players doing some things wrong, some things right. Red has a more efficient force, therefore he has a bigger army, but his production is a little bit too far away from the front. I have production close to the front, but my economy is a little bit more of a mess, and I consistently have a smaller army. So from my point of view, this is absolutely desperate times here. He is, this is, if ever there's an enemy at the gate situation, this is it. He is the enemies at the gates, and I need to somehow find a way to fight this back. And the solution is onagers. Of course, when your enemy has onagers, that's also not a great situation. So now we have the delicate task of strategic onager shots. Who can out-onager the other? And quick foreshadow, I don't think either player managed to out-onager the other. Both used onagers pretty well here. So a little bit of a cluster there, but alright. So this is where things get a bit ugly. He has a lot of units here clumped up. If I can get just one shot out, and there it is. So one shot of an onager can change the situation completely, and his near breakthrough here does not really pan out. However, he's done damage, and the moment I think that I've defeated his army, of course, he comes with another one. So I actually need to rebuild my buildings in the middle of the battle. So these trebuchets, of course, are doing great damage from the distance, although I wonder whether he should have built siege rams, but it's hard to say. Trebuchets are also great. However, for every building he destroys, you can see I am dropping buildings many more, so he does need to get just enough siege in to be able to destroy them faster than I can build them. And one shot, and the battle changes. Also, his rally point isn't quite at the front line, which means they're not coming straight to help. That said, I'm not really in a position to criticize. I am totally on the defensive here, and you can see Red is now also playing a game of whack-a-mole, taking out my onagers, which for me are extremely expensive. I have no gold, so every onager I lose, that is an onager I cannot replace very quickly. We are both now in the trash game phase of the game. There is no gold on the map except the gold in our monasteries, and the rest of it is just pure trash units. So my palisade wall continues, and the moment I have more land, I build more farms because I am absolutely desperate for resources. However, the Drazina is slowly playing an effect, and I'm hoping it can hold him at bay while I try to figure out a strategy to defeat him. But again, his armies are just consistently bigger than mine, so it does get pretty difficult to do anything. Slowly though, the conclusion I come to is I really need to hit his economy. There's no other way to beat him. And although I didn't know, I wasn't sure how big his economy is. I wondered, who knows, maybe he's got thousands of resources piled up in his kind of resource bank here. Maybe he's got thousands of resources, but I was guessing. My feeling was he must be as desperate as me in terms of resources. He's got to be. I mean, my resources are constantly out of, I'm constantly close to bankruptcy here. The moment I have resources, they get transferred into troops in order to max out. It's got to be a similar situation to him. So the only way I can, and turns out that is pretty much the case. He does have some resources, he's not maxed out, but other times he has no resources and is maxed out. So it is actually the same situation for him. He is using resources as soon as they come in. We're both in very similar situations, and at any moment the battle could turn here. And if one of us manages to go too deep into the economy, then that could be the beginning of the end. And so my strategy here eventually becomes, I need to figure out a way, somehow I need to figure out a way to hit his economy. And if I can disable his economy, even for just a minute or two, even for 30 seconds, that might be a window for me to break out and then have the edge and be able to beat him. So that's the idea. If I can just disable his economy, just briefly, it might create a window, because in that minute or 2 minutes, he will not have resources, and so he will not be able to replace his troops. So that becomes my strategy. However, it is not easy because I am constantly fighting a battle of survival here. Alright, so here we have another onager showdown, and oh my goodness. Mutually assured destruction, as they say, although I come out with 2 extra 3 onagers left, although I'm sure he has more on the way as well. So those onagers are so dangerous when it comes to skirmishers, so taking them out can be really important. And again, the moment I think I've won a battle, he shows up with a new large army. My army actually is quite small at this point. I am replacing it, but I also have a lot of idle villagers, and too many villagers actually, so it actually is difficult to have a large force. Slowly, both players are getting a bit more desperate to somehow break this deadlock. How do you break this deadlock? And then, if you, the moment you feel safe and think, alright, I've held him off and this is stabilizing, the moment you think that, the opponent breaks through, and it suddenly becomes very critical that you turn the tide again. And that is again where these onagers come in handy. A couple of well-placed shots, and it changes the picture completely. Although It's definitely not easy getting those shots out. So he is in my base, and it is a desperate fight, and yet my strategy remains I need to somehow raid his economy. That's the only way I can break this deadlock. And yet, there are moments where it doesn't seem like a deadlock. It seems where he's actually breaking through. This was all desperate fighting here. And I lose my onagers. So close he is here to breaking through, and yet the same drill. Rebuild the buildings, fight him off, and take out his onagers with my onagers, and the whole process starts all over again. I can definitely say I don't think I've ever had a game that lasted quite like this, with a stalemate, kind of like a Black Forest game, just stuck at one front. Neither side being able to win a significant advantage. If anything, I definitely think that Red has the edge here. He's on the offense and I'm on the defense. And it's really these buildings absorbing so much damage, I think, that allow me to take out his army. But if you can see, I have a huge production line with so many buildings, whereas his is a little bit smaller actually. So it is at this point that I decide, you know what, I really need to do something to get out of this. And so I rally my troops here. I saw he had villagers here. And I try again to somehow raid his economy, but it is quite difficult when you've got an enemy army right in your entrance, at your entrance. But somehow I figure, no, I have to do it. I have to somehow send troops out and raid his economy. If he takes down some buildings, then that is exactly what they were supposed to do. And I send this small force here to try to raid him. And from my vision, I actually have very little vision of the map. I can hardly see anything, so I'm still just exploring the map. All I know is my end of the map. I don't know where his economy is located, so this is as much to get information as it is to raid his economy, to actually figure out where his base is. However, he sends these villagers over, and I am beginning to have a sense of where I can hit his economy. Both players are maxed out, and the war of attrition continues. His rally point not quite where it should be. It should really be over here, I think, and man, some battering rams would really do a lot of damage here, I think. More damage to my buildings than these onagers, but hard to do everything at once though. So Red really is in a commanding position here. He's in my base. He just needs a little bit more siege and maybe he can break through. At long last. Every now and then I need to adjust my rally point, make sure it's not too close to the front. Because if it is too close to the front, my troops will just die single file. And that won't do. It's much better to update your rally point, put it further behind the front so that your units can actually rally. Otherwise, you will lose most of your units. And this is now the beginning of the final showdown of the game. We're now entering the end game phase of the game. Both players have become, I think, pretty tired of this, and both are just desperately looking for a way to somehow tip the balance, somehow break the stalemate. And so Red decides he has to raid my economy. What he does is he uses these onagers to try to strike at my economy. But I question that move because he actually was making a lot of progress here. I thought I was just desperately holding on, and while I could continuously replace my troops, he definitely was making progress. A little bit more siege, I think, and he probably could have pushed a bit further, but let's see how this pans out. Whoops. That happens every now and then. Meanwhile, he is making a hole in the forest, and he is going to sneak in. However, he has no unit backup, just these onagers. and just a couple of halberds, and that does the trick actually. With nowhere to go and no backup, that's what happens. He is in my base, but he's destroying buildings. Not the end of the world. I decide these units are gonna raid his economy and get revenge on my fallen villagers. Although, and I'll mention this again later, I have too many villagers, so actually losing some villagers here is not actually the worst thing. If you look at it from the overall picture here, where I actually have too few troops and too many villagers, whereas he has actually not quite enough villagers, but a great number of troops. And he decides to also raid my economy and send his troops right into the middle. But I wonder whether this backfires. So he now walls off his economy, or tries his best to. And this is where they come in. And this is when I see for the first time where his economy is back there. Until this point I had no idea where his economy was. Or at least I knew it was in his base, but I didn't really know the actual layout. Meanwhile, his troops here that were sent in get distracted with buildings, I assume, or are taken down piece by piece. So they do run in uselessly a little bit. However, I see that this is where his wood line is. And I figure I am going to try that again. So as mentioned, his economy is not quite strong enough. 80 villagers, he is not able to max out right away here. Meanwhile, my absolutely overdone villager count is at least allowing me to have enough resources to max out right away. And at this point of the game I decide, what the heck, I'm gonna send in this entire force to raid his economy. I'm not gonna bother attacking anything else. I need to somehow disable his economy. Even just for 1 minute, if I can just put his economy on freeze for a minute, then during that entire time he will not have income, which means he will not be able to replace troops during that time. So the longer I can keep his economy on shutdown, the better to try to somehow win this game. And I send in this group of reinforcements as well, and my new rally point is here. But this time I've learned my lesson. I don't send in my troops too close to these town centers, and I keep these guys alive. And instead I simply besiege his wood line. Eventually, anyway. So by keeping these troops here, I can stop his wood income. And if you look at his economy in this moment, he has 68 idle villagers. His economy is effectively on hold. This is a window of opportunity for me because my economy is not on hold. I continue to have a large income, which means I can build up and finally try to break out. This, anyway, is the plan. We'll see how that plays out. Like any plan, good on paper, good in theory. Let's see if it actually turns out in practice. So most of his economy remains on hold because of this army down here. However, he does have enough inertia, enough troops in the field, and his castles stop my little push out, because guess what? Turns out I have far too many villagers, and it is just not possible to accumulate enough troops to make a breakout. Meanwhile, I'll lose sight of this, and I lose my troops. And he is able to restart his economy. So much for that from a certain perspective. However, you know, maybe it did do the trick. I actually didn't see this here. I actually didn't see that he sent his troops back, and so I keep wondering, where are his villagers? And I end up looking for them over there. That's not where they are. They went back. But anyway, during that time, his economy was on hold. He's got very few economy. His supply is quite low. And I remain maxed maxed out, and I'm gonna keep trying to break out and take down this castle. And, you know, if I've gained a little land, why not? I'm gonna drop some buildings. So, this is a really strange moment in the game, because instead of rebounding from this moment, which I think Red really needed to do here, he really needed to get maxed out as soon as possible. Instead, he does the same thing again, which is uses onagers to raid my wood line. And if you look at it, this actually, ironically, helps me, because I am maxed out and I have too many villagers. So he is now taking out my villagers, allowing me to build more units. So by killing my villagers over here, he's allowing me to have more units here, which will allow me to have a bigger force to try to take down his castle. That is one of the stranger ironies of this game, and yet that is how this turns out. And once again, I'm not quite sure why he did this. A couple of halberds do the trick. Meanwhile, I push out again, and once again, I've got a castle down to very low health. Do I manage to take it down this time? You know, there was this castle earlier on. Both times came so close. Do I manage it this time? And it finally goes down. Pretty funny to look at it here, but in the game this was quite a satisfying moment to finally take down that castle. Meanwhile, these onagers are destroyed. And seeing as I've gained a little bit of land, I drop all these buildings. Buildings are very cheap. I've got enough wood. Even if I were to lose this battle, it means he would have to destroy these buildings. But I try to keep the momentum going. And this is definitely one of the stranger moments here. Red drops a castle in the hopes of stopping the tide here. Gets to 92%, and he sends more villagers. And as you can see, he's down to 76 villagers, has not too many resources. For the first time in this game, it looks like I'm on the offensive. However, it is definitely not confirmed at this point. Alright, 96%, so close. And yet, I think that is... Does he try one more time with more villagers? Here come more villagers to finish off this castle. If he can finish this castle, he might be able to turn the tide here. And this is actually almost painful to watch. His villagers do not make it, and that castle never goes up. So close. I feel like I had... Okay, so GG's now. I thought I had quite a number. I can't even spell at this point. Fam. GG. One long game here. This is hour 3 here. And that... The castle goes down. That is how the game ends. Alright, let's return to the map just quickly. So, after that absolutely long war of attrition, I managed to disable his economy just barely long enough to break out. Although what actually did the trick was losing villagers over here thanks to his raid, which allows my army to become just large enough to push out here. Let's just see how the score adds up. Alright, so this is where you get a great overview. My unit exchange was much worse than him. He killed almost twice as many units as me. So pretty embarrassing to see that, but it does make sense when you think about how his army was larger, as I pointed out. He consistently had about 50%, I'd say, larger force than me. And 50% fewer villagers, and still had his economy operating efficiently. So I think that that's how we end up with this result here. He also destroyed 161 of my buildings, and this really comes back to the point that I started off on, which is buildings can, when used defensively, actually be quite strategic. Of course, you know, some players will avoid those buildings then and go straight for the opponent's economy, and that actually might be a good move in some circumstances. But if you still have an army, you can then use your force to hold off their army, and meanwhile his units are distracted with your buildings. So it's a little bit of a tricky balance there. Anyway, in this case, 161 buildings, they did their job. So he had the larger army, but this is where the economy gets really skewed here. You can see he took 44,000 gold, so that's nearly twice as much gold as I did. Definitely took the lion's share of the map, did a really great job of just occupying the center and taking all the stone and gold. However, 200,000 food on my end next to his 115,000 food. So it shows that I had almost 85,000 more food, and similarly about 40 or 50,000 more wood. So that definitely explains that unit count over there, and how I was able to just pump out that many units to hold his offensive at bay. Having that full capacity economy does the trick. Everything else in the game seems to be more or less even, similar research count, back and forth between advancing to the next age. And villager count here, 154 villagers I had at one point. That is pretty cringy to see, but it makes sense that when you're playing a desperate defensive battle and you are out of resources, it often ends up that you get too many villagers. Although I think I probably averaged around 120 in the game, but definitely had a little bit too many there at the very end, and it was thanks to his onagers that came down a bit, and I was able to get a large enough force to really make a breakout. He had more castles, did a much better job of holding those. I lost all of my early castles. Interestingly, I had more relic gold, and that is through having that little corner relic there for a large part of the game. So that definitely helped me get those onagers out. But he ended the game with more relics. And the timeline, my goodness, can you count how many battles here? It is, I think, I don't know, what is that, 20 major battles that ended in stalemate. This is not common. Most games are 45 minutes to maybe an hour and 15 minutes. They do not last 3 hours. So many battles that are stalemates are quite uncommon. Definitely a complete game. You really saw the whole variety of situations there. And once again, big hats off to my opponent for being such a great sport, and for the game being so close. Definitely was a game that I have not experienced in quite some time. Alright, with that, hope you guys enjoyed the game, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.